For Poland, the 1970s began in blood and fire. In December 1970, the workers of the Baltic coast rebelled against an increase in food prices. The demonstrators were fired on, and many died. But they brought about the fall of Władysław Gomułka, the man who had ruled Poland since 1956.
Dochodziła godzina 20.
Edward Gierek took over on December the 20th, 1970. That evening, he went on television. The new leader, who had once worked as a coal miner, promised that he would listen to the people and bring them justice.
Zwracam się więc do Was w imieniu partii. W ostatnim tygodniu zaszły wydarzenia, które głęboko wstrząsnęły całym społeczeństwem i postawiły ojczyznę w obliczu wielkiego niebezpieczeństwa.
But the unrest smoldered on. In January, strikes broke out again. Gierek faced his first test. He accepted a challenge from the shipyard workers in Szczecin to come and face them and discuss their grievances.
Spotkanie przywódców partii i rządu ze szczecińskimi stoczniowcami. Edward Gierek i Piotr Jaroszewicz przyjechali do robotników, którzy mieli za sobą niejedno gorzkie doświadczenie.
The workers called it a strike for truth. Their debates had gone far beyond pay and prices. They now wanted newspapers that told the truth about them and freely elected trade unions. For hour after hour, Gierek let the workers pour out their complaints and accusations. He admitted that the party had lost contact with the working class. Like Gomułka, 15 years before, he promised a new democracy, even free elections to the official trade union. He said that he too was a simple worker and begged the strikers to trust him. He won their guarded confidence.
Stocznia Gdańska jest najbardziej zasłużona dla eksportu i rozbudowy polskiej floty. Tu stawialiśmy pierwsze kroki przy nitowaniu rudowęglowców.
Next day, Edward Gierek set off to face the Lenin shipyard at Gdansk.
Wtedy nie wiedzieliśmy,
We didn't know, at least I didn't know, that they'd already had talks in Szczecin.
Gierek prosił, żebyśmy...
Gierek asked us to help him, and before that one of the ministers made a statement and began to weep. He's sorry that he's crying, but of course even a minister is only human.
No, oczywiście minister to też jest tylko...
We'd counted on things taking a new turn, that people had understood, that the authorities had understood. Gierek sensed the situation in the room, because here and there tears appeared in people's eyes, hearts softened. And then he appealed to us, would we help him? And I was one of those who cried, we will help.
In March 1971, deposed party leader Władysław Gomułka warned, if the party leadership has once been overturned by means of street unrest, which has been fully endorsed by the new leadership, a very dangerous precedent has been set.
There is surely no other nation which has been waiting with such impatience for the possibility of owning a family car. In the past, there were horses, which the Poles rode with panache and skill, and loved them like few others. But the era of the horse is over. Nevertheless, the arrival of the era of the motor car was long overdue. The Fiat 126P and the larger 125P are the effect of industrial cooperation with Italy. It is with those cars that the Poles are entering the ranks of the most automobile-saturated nations.
Lata 71-72.
In the years 1971 and 72, Edward Gierek gave priority to removing what's often called the straitjacket from the Polish economy.
Gomułka był zwolennikiem.
Gomułka had been an advocate of autarky. That's to say, economic self-sufficiency, developing according to your own potential and your own needs.
Edward Gierek tutaj postanowił radykalnie zmienić.
Edward Gierek resolved to radically change this policy
Radykalnie zmienić politykę.
and to begin opening Poland up to other countries, especially Western countries, countries with a market economy.
Krajów o gospodarce rynkowej.
In 1972, President Richard Nixon of the United States visited Poland to a frantic popular welcome. These were the years of détente, and Gierek took advantage of it to borrow Western money. The loans would buy Western machinery for new industries in Poland. The standard of living would take a leap forward, and exports would pay off the foreign debt.
The American engagement, so to speak, into Poland goes back to the Eisenhower administration, 56. And ever since then, every American administration, Democratic or Republican, has been of the view that a better American-Polish relationship was in the American interest. We saw in Poland under Gierek both the prospects for some economic modernization that would bring Poland into a closer relationship with the West, but also growing opportunities for political pluralization.
Ludzie uwierzyli, że ta władza wie, co trzeba robić.
People began to believe that the authorities knew what needed to be done and probably knew best.
Poziom konsumpcji,
The level of consumption, the colorful new consumer goods, showed that they were able to do it effectively.
że ona potrafi to skutecznie realizować. I w gruncie rzeczy
Basically, the population, it seems to me, to a large extent decided it had won in December 1970.
Grudzień 70 roku.
In the early 70s, over a third of Poland's population still lived in the countryside. 80% of Poland's farms belonged to private peasants. These small farms were starved of investment. At first, the Gierek regime tried to raise output by allowing private farmers better prices, social security, and the right to buy tractors. But inflation soon ate away these gains. The peasants, seeing how the government kept investment in fertilizer for its own state farms, suspected bad faith.
Jeżeli chodzi o tego reformy
As far as Gierek's reforms are concerned, it must be admitted that some of them were received with approval by the peasants.
ale mimo wszystko na wsi
But nevertheless, there remained in the countryside an uncertainty in relation to the communist system,
komunistycznego,
an uncertainty regarding ownership rights, the right of the peasants to own land.
Do własności chłopów do ziemi. Chłopi
The peasants are convinced, right up to the present moment, that if the communist authorities feel strong, feel secure, they will want to take the land from the peasants.
będą czuły się pewnie, to będą chcieli
They will impose on them that humiliating, servile work on collective farms, the so-called kolkhozes.
pracę w kolektywnych gospodarstwach, tak zwanych kolchozach.
By the early 1970s, Poland was enjoying a huge economic boom. But Gierek feared Soviet disapproval. The scale of Poland's Western trade, like Gierek's encouragement to private farmers, defied the conventions of the Soviet bloc.
Całego serca witała Warszawa dostojnego gościa. Wzdłuż trasy...
In 1975, draft amendments to the Constitution were published. They declared that Poland was bound to the Soviet alliance and that the Polish United Workers' Party, the Communist Party, must hold the leading role in the state.
Tak było na każdej ulicy.
Poles who remembered their democratic traditions were outraged. The intellectuals protested, and the Catholic Church backed them. They found widespread support.
W każdym razie wtedy wyglądało to na czysto rytualny
At the time, it looked like a purely ritual gesture. Of course, the few opposition groups which had survived in isolation since 1968, we all wrote letters because, well, we didn't have anything to lose anymore. It was a gesture. But I, for example, didn't personally have the feeling that I was doing something particularly important, nor that the authorities were doing something that changed the real situation. And suddenly, it turned out that the matter was important. There was a flood of spontaneous protests from people. And for the first time, we had the feeling that people were waking up. Because this was a reaction we hadn't expected at all.
Społeczeństwo jakby się budzi, bo to była reakcja zupełnie przez nas nieoczekiwana.
In spite of its show of strength, the government took fright. The amendments to the Constitution were rewritten, watered down.
Kraj nie miał wyboru. Budowa takiej huty stała się koniecznością najpilniejszą, by dynamicznej gospodarce polskiej lat 70. i 80. zapewnić produkt nieodzowny – stal, by ograniczyć rosnący import.
Poland in the early 1970s had one of the fastest growth rates in the world. National income rose by 10% or more each year. The value of imported machinery from the West multiplied nearly 20 times in 5 years. Real wages went up by 40% between 1970 and 1975.
Rok 1976.
But the economy was managed in the same old way. Most decisions were still taken by bureaucrats in Warsaw. Factory managers were still party nominees.
They had built a lot of factories at that time, but they didn't have the resources to produce any goods. They didn't have materials, and they didn't have enough labor, and they didn't have power. The head of factory, he's responsible for the direct administration of the factory, but he cannot make the decision himself. He has to ask the higher level. The higher level has to ask the higher level. Sometimes you have to go through 5, 6 levels to get the decision, and then the decision has to come back to the lowest level.
Dobry. Dobry.
In 1974, Poland bought a license to build Massey Ferguson tractors at the Ursos plant.
My wiedzieliśmy, że przecież bądź co bądź cały świat.
We knew that the whole world was going metric, whereas this tractor was in feet and inches. So this was madness.
Paranoja, ponieważ decyzja.
And the decision of the English was right. Because as we know, it's costly to remove outdated machinery from a factory. But if a foolish buyer can be found, I'm sorry to put it this way, but that's how it seemed to us, that is simply idiotic. There were meetings on this subject. There were many such meetings. Departmental meetings, meetings of the whole works, and we protested. We delved into technical details. We proved to them that it was senseless, that it mustn't be done. Unfortunately, these words of ours were the voice of a tawny owl in the wilderness.
Głosem puszczyka na puszczy.
A walk through the Mazowsze countryside with his wife. Mrs. Gierek often accompanies the First Secretary in his travels around the country and is notably successful in relieving the many tensions from the cares which have accumulated through the week, with one smile. The national program of care of the...
Gierek's plans for Poland were already in trouble. After the Middle East War of 1973, world oil prices soared upwards. Imports from the West became far more expensive, while demand for Polish goods fell. Foreign debt began to tower over Poland.
Po raz pierwszy chyba w 75 roku okazało się,
For the first time in the year 75, it turned out that our debts exceeded the value of yearly exports. and the repayments of credits exceeded 25% of exports, which means that they had crossed all permissible limits in this field. And so debts had to be incurred to repay debts already incurred earlier.
Gierek, nervous of the workers, whose revolt had brought him to power, kept prices unchanged for 5 years. Then in June 1976, the government tried to solve the problem at a stroke by raising basic food prices by an average of some 60%. The workers' reaction was immediate.
I było to automatyczne, niezależne.
It was automatic, spontaneous. Something just got into us, and we stopped working. Nobody persuaded anyone to strike. No one led the strike. There weren't any leaders. Everybody just stopped work.
Przestali pracować.
In the Ursus plant near Warsaw, at Radom and elsewhere, workers took to the streets. They took their grievances to the party, as they had done in 1970. Nobody would talk to them. At Ursus, women blocked the trains on the main rail link between the Soviet Union and East Germany. At Radom, demonstrators broke into the party headquarters. The officials had already fled. Workers began to throw sausages, ham, television sets, and other luxuries out of the windows to the crowd below, to show how well their masters lived. They then set the building on fire. In panic, the government canceled the price rises that evening. But as the crowd began to disperse, the police charged and began their revenge.
I was walking through the streets of Żoliborz, and from all the windows, I heard Jaroszewicz's speech cancelling the rise. And we got the feeling that we were living in a different country. A country in which the workers' veto against the rise in the price of meat, because that's what it was about, had been accepted as a principle, as it were, of the functioning of the state.
No, przywitanie w areszcie było raczej dosyć nieprzyjemne, gdyż
Well, the reception in detention was rather unpleasant,
po obu stronach korytarza pracowników
because on either side of the corridor there stood a long line of prison warders, armed with very long truncheons, 2.5 foot long.
No i przejście wprowadzonych polegało na tym, że muszą przejść między
And those arriving had to run the gauntlet between these two rows.
tych szeregów. No,
Well, everyone standing in the rows was trying to hit the people passing through,
starał się uderzyć, trafić.
and everyone ran in order to avoid being hit, to get fewer blows from the truncheons.
Otrzymać jak najmniej.
Postępowanie władz, organów ścigania, wymiaru sprawiedliwości w stosunku...
The conduct and attitude of the authorities, of the police and judiciary, towards the Radom workers following that memorable day in June 1976.
Po tym, co obejrzałem...
After what I had seen with my own eyes, I suffered an inner shock.
Przeżyłem wewnętrzny szok. Był to dosłownie dla mnie
It was
szok.
literally a shock.
Zacząłem rozumieć, że jednak
I started to realize that the authorities were not what they claimed to be,
władza,
working class leaders.
jaką mianuje się władza robotnicza.
Chciałabym zapewnić klasę robotniczą całego kraju, partię naszych przywódców, że podzielamy wasz gniew i oburzenie z faktu, że część załóg naszych kolegów, zapominając o podstawowych obowiązkach normalnych, porzucili pracę, wywodząc burdy godzące nie tylko w imię Radomia, ale całego naszego kraju. Przerażeniem napawa jednak fakt, że działania zniszczenia dokonała młodzież i dzieci naszych znajomych, żyjących dla siebie, zajmujących się tym.
While the authorities tried to save face through a piece of political theatre, a completely new form of opposition was arising. A small group of intellectuals set up the Committee for the Defense of the Workers, CORE. Its first aim was to raise money for the legal defense of arrested workers and to help their families.
As the action of help got underway, we became aware that something was being born which was simply unheard of. This fantastic idea, which seemed almost to paralyze the authorities, that we were defending the workers. and the incredible awareness on the part of society,
Te pieniądze, które...
the money which began to flow in.
Coś, co się w ogóle...
This was something which we'd never experienced.
Czego myśmy jakby nie znali żadnego doświadczenia.
And the whole development of the core method of action and this core formula was a development which was purely practical, without any great ideological
Bardzo
visions.
praktycznym, bez wielkich wizji ideologicznych.
This Belgian film shows core members being followed by plainclothes police agents. The Western media also tracked core, among whose most active members was Jacek Kuron. Like several of his colleagues, Kuron had started his opposition to the system as a young communist. He had spent long periods in jail during the 1960s. Core was now urging Poles to build independent social movements of their own within communist society. Despite constant and often brutal harassment, the authorities stopped short of crushing these groups outright.
We have the feeling that this is a society with a double face. Of course, that is certainly how it is, although this is changing slightly in recent times in the sense, well, what does it mean, this schizophrenia? It means that what one thinks and says among one's close circle of friends is different from what one says in public. Because people are scared. They want to work, want promotion, want a home, or to buy a car if they earn more. And of course, such public declarations are rewarded by the authorities.
Wiadomo, że premiuje się takie deklamacje na cześć władzy.
Don't you think there are not enough social democracy inside your country and your party, and you don't know what the people really want on the top of the state and the top of the party?
We know very well.
By which way?
Oh, by thousands of possibilities which we have in the practice. We have institutes for sociology. We ask people by many occasions what they are thinking. For instance, I as an editor, people send me a letter, and these letters are very critical. I know very well what is going on in this country.
I'm sorry, but don't you think that the best way to know what the people really think are free consultation, free election with different kind of parties?
Free consultation, free election, this is are different things, because again we landed on this subject. What does mean the democracy in your system? What does mean in our system? I don't believe that people in Poland feel they are not free. I don't believe. I know my people as myself.
By now it was clear that we weren't going to protest continually and only about sausages and bread. We felt subconsciously, as the saying goes, one does not live by bread alone. So it was no longer only a question of bread, it was now a question of the dignity of the worker and of the value of his work.
On October the 16th, 1978, Cardinal Karol Wojtyła of Krakow was elected Pope. Catholic Poland erupted with joy and pride. In 1979, Pope John Paul II was welcomed in his own country like a king. There was a huge self-confidence in the nation, a new impatience.
The whole nation realized perfectly well, after Hungary 1956, Czechoslovakia 1968, that there was no question of fighting to change the system. It was only possible to try and find some secondary area where we could significantly affect the practice of the system, whilst leaving its outward form unaltered.
Systemu, nie zmieniając niejako jego ogólnej postaci.
In the spring of 1978, a new form of opposition came into being. Committees were formed, one in Katowice and one in Gdansk, for the founding of trade unions free of party control.
The first meeting was, well, for me, it was a great experience. I went in and immediately said, "My name is Anna Valentinovich. I am from the Gdansk shipyard." And they all said, "Shh, this place is bugged."
Nie narzekam. Teraz nie narzekam, nie Bóg broni, nie narzekam. Ale powinno być trochę lepiej. Bo wie pan, żona idzie w kolejkę, stoi, cholera nie ma, ty kupić te parę deko wędliny nie ma, no nie ma. A gdzie to idzie? Tyle u nas w Polsce świni hodują, u nas nie można kupić. I tak to będzie wycięte.
Ale no proszę, a wy jak z tym co zarabiacie, to możecie sobie zapłacić taki apartament?
Jak to wygląda z tym co zarabiamy?
Wasz zarobek?
Żeby kupić to mieszkanie? No przeciętnie się zarabia 3000 miesięcznie, tak? A mieszkanie kosztuje około 500 000 w tej chwili, więc można przeliczyć, no. I ma 2 dzieci i żonę i to mu na życie prawie, że nie wystarczy, prawda? A gdzie kupić?
Tutaj władze mówią, że to jest kraj dyktatury proletariatu i też tych chłopów, ale czy to jest realność, czy to tylko teoria?
Dobra, chodźmy na robotkę.
By July 1980, Poland was plunged into the worst economic crisis seen in post-war Europe. The state was almost bankrupt. Food, medicines, shoes were vanishing from the shops. Cautiously, the government again raised food prices. At once, factories began to strike. On August the 14th, 1980, the Lenin shipyard at Gdansk stopped work in protest against the dismissal of Anna Valentinovich. Within days, the strike spread along the coast. The workers listed their demands. The first was for free trade unions.
When at least 40 workers and maybe as many as 200 were killed in violent demonstrations.
The first response of the authorities was to cut off the Gdansk telephones. The strikers settled in for a long siege. Their greatest fear was a police attack which might repeat the violence of December 1970.
We found out from official sources. We know how to read between the lines. Everybody listened to the news. An organization began in Ursus of groups which formed, as it were, the origin of what was later created.
Delegater från andra lokala strejkkommittéer pendlar nu mellan sina fabriker och varvet med bilar.
I hoped that I would be able to push through the case of the individual farmers alongside the case of the workers, that this nationwide movement of workers would provide an opportunity for sorting out the problems of individual farmers, which were very, very grave. So I organized meetings in the 19 villages in the rural district of Stegna, and we collected the demands and took them to the shipyard, where I stayed on as a delegate.
The leader of the Gdansk strike was Lech Wałęsa, an electrician who had been dismissed from the Lenin shipyard for political agitation.
Czy macie trudności z utrzymaniem kontaktu z załogami strajkujących zakładów?
Na pewno są trudności, ale to jest nieuniknione, sprawa jasna. I tak i nie, to jest odpowiedź. Niektóre delegacje przechodzą, niektóre nie, no sprawa jasna, władza przeszkadza.
By now, other strike committees at Szczecin and elsewhere across Poland were joining the movement. On August the 23rd, the Gdansk strikers heard that Vice Premier Mieczysław Jagielski was coming to discuss their demands. Jagielski and his advisors arrived at the shipyard at 8 that evening. An inter-factory strike committee faced the government with a list of 21 demands, political and economic.
Sytuacja ekonomiczna była trudna, zadłużenie.
The economic situation was difficult.
Miliardów dolarów. No i teraz wyobraźmy sobie.
Debts to the tune of $21 billion.
Prowadzić natychmiast.
Now, let's imagine that despite this situation, non-working Saturdays must be introduced immediately. Strike pay has to be introduced, just like rest days. To increase wages by 2,000 zloty for every employee. Considerably increase pensions and retirement pensions. And many other economic demands. Oh, and shorten the waiting period for flats to 5 years. Considerably improve supplies in shops of meat and other goods, and other demands of that kind.
Tego typu więcej postulatów. No jak gdyby ktoś był czarodziejem.
Well, if someone were a magician, then he could conjure up the fulfillment of these sorts of demands.
Postulaty, realizację tego typu postulatów.
The Western media crowded into the shipyard. The strike leaders wanted the world to see what they were doing. If the strike failed, at least the truth about their struggle could never be suppressed.
Rolling.
Ja mam może następującą, panie przewodniczący, propozycję. Nigdy nie miałem takiej przyjemności, żeby być cały czas filmowanym, prawda, przez kamery telewizyjne. Może je zgasimy, bo to nam nie ułatwia po prostu. To jest potrzebne.
Nasze spojrzenie na związki przedstawi Andrzej Gwiazda.
Działalność związków zawodowych w PRL nie spełniła nadziei i oczekiwań pracowników. Uznaje się za celowe powołanie nowych samorządnych związków zawodowych, które byłyby autentycznym reprezentantem klasy pracującej. Nie kwestionuje się prawa nikogo do pozostania w dotychczasowych związkach, a w przyszłości widzieć można możliwość nawiązania współpracy między związkami.
Every word of the negotiations was broadcast to the factory delegates and to the strikers waiting outside. The workers had brought in sociologists, economists, and historians as advisors, ending the long estrangement between workers and intellectuals. As well as free trade unions, the 21 demands included a curb on censorship, a 5-day working week, the broadcasting of the Catholic Mass, the release of political prisoners, and a reform of the economy to break the party's control of management. The workers spoke to the government with brutal frankness.
Mamy zagwarantowane bezpieczeństwo za akcję strajkową, że uczestnicy i współpracownicy strajku, ludzie wspomagający strajk nie będą prześladowani, nie będą represjonowani. Ale czy możemy być pewni, że nie znajdą się fałszywi świadkowie i fałszywy proces i nie okaże się, że cały MKS to banda kryminalistów? Panie premierze i Wysoka Komisja, jest to sprawa, uważam, podstawowej wagi. Jest to sprawa, czy ustrój nasz będzie określany jako policyjny, czy jako demokratyczny. Nie chcemy żyć w kraju, w którym jedność narodu jest wymuszana pałką policyjną.
Wydaje mi się, że pan sformułuje bardzo dalekie, proszę pana, ujęcia sprawy. Takie jest moje osobiste odczucie jako przewodniczącego Komisji Rządowej. Pan użył stwierdzenia, które ja panu powiem, że mnie ubodło. No bo jak można powiedzieć, jaką mamy gwarancję, że strajkujący tutaj i prezydium nie będą, że tak powiem, uznani za, nie chcę nawet powtórzyć, pan użył słowa kryminalistów. Ja panu powiem, że mnie to nawet osobiście ubodło. Przecież ja rozmawiam jak z najbardziej uczciwymi ludźmi. Jak jest możliwe, żeby ktoś traktował działaczy tutaj zebranych?
Panie premierze, kiedy ja mam dziesiątki straszenia mnie już, że jak tylko wyjdę, to będzie to i to. Ja nie tylko.
Proszę pana, to i mnie wtedy trzeba przepędzić.
On the 18th day of the strike, on Sunday, August the 31st, 1980, the Gdansk Agreement was signed by Wałęsa and Jagielski. It was a contract between rulers and ruled, a social treaty unique in modern history. The government gave way on all the political demands, though it gave little ground over hours and wages. In return, the right of the party and state to rule was not challenged. The workers would have free unions and would use them to see that the agreement was kept.
Mamy wreszcie niezależne, samorządne związki zawodowe. prawo do strajku. A następne prawa ustanowimy już niedługo.
Tu uważałam, znowuż tak
Again, I believed that trust was returning. Just as when Gierek came, I believed him and was disappointed. This time I thought that after all we would put it into practice because we were the signatories of this agreement. And oh God, once again I was disappointed.
Ja nie wiem, czy to było dobre.
I don't know whether this was a good place, the Gdansk shipyard, in which to think about Poland's future.
Myśleć o przyszłości Polski.
There were many times, not constantly of course, when we realized that the whole thing might end in wholesale death, that this strike might be suppressed by force.
Zdawali sobie sprawę, że to się...
On a number of occasions, there were such rumors and such an atmosphere.
Że ten strajk może być zgnieciony siłą.
And suddenly it turns out that it is just the opposite. We take off like a rocket into the cosmos.
Jak rakieta w kosmos. Nagle
Suddenly, out of a small trade union movement, out of a small committee, something awesome is growing, getting bigger from day to day. From all over Poland, masses of people are coming to join us. And for all the modest provincial people here, this was something overwhelming, when some great big steelworks comes forward and wants to enlist. For the first time in the history of world communism, there appeared an independent structure.
Pojawiła się niezależna struktura.
Solidarity, the title of the strike bulletin at Gdansk, was chosen as the name of the new trade union. All over Poland, strike committees set up Solidarity branches. Each regional office swarmed with people seeking advice or offering help. Early in September, Stanisław Kania replaced the discredited Gierek as party leader. The official trade unions withered. Tens of thousands of rank-and-file party members joined Solidarity. The party faced its own rebellion.
A ilu z was jest w partii w ogóle?
No nie wiem, trzeba by zapytać, bo nie interesuje mnie.
Nie, ale z tego grona.
To ja jestem kandydatem do partii, prawdaż?
A dlaczego?
Dlaczego? Znaczy w ogóle, bo tak kolega powiedział, idee partii są na pewno bardzo dobre. No niestety, do tej pory mało się mówi o tym, czym jest faktycznie partia i dopiero teraz wychodzi to wszystko na jaw, co się tam działo.
No, czerwona burżuazja się wytworzyła.
No, coś
krótko
takiego
można
właśnie.
sumować. No co?
Tak.
Chcesz się zmienić?
No chciałbym na pewno, żeby była inna, żeby była taka, jak faktycznie powinna być. Dbająca o ludzi, o wszystkich.
Że tutaj zadaniem Solidarności jest pogłębienie tej demokracji i przykłady takie już mamy, prawda, że niektóre organizacje zaczynają się wzorować na ordynacji wyborczej Solidarności, wprowadzają pewne ograniczenia, jeżeli chodzi o czas pełnienia funkcji i temu podobne jakieś takie sygnały, które pozwalają uwierzyć w to, że coś się zmieni. Wszędzie, nie tylko w Solidarności.
Z tego punktu widzenia ten ruch, który dziś się zaczął w partii.
This movement which has begun in the party towards democratization, not in the party bureaucracy, not in the leadership, but in the mass membership, has a certain element of danger. Because if we ask ourselves what guarantees the Soviet Union has here, then one of these guarantees is the party and its influence and role in the life of society. If the party were to change, it could lose the trust of the Soviet Union. This could be dangerous.
Conflicts with the government broke out again only weeks after the signing of the agreements. There were delays over wage rises, delays over access to the media. In mid-October, Solidarity supporters gathered outside the district court in Warsaw, where the union had applied for formal registration. When the judge agreed to register the union, there were cheers and rejoicing. As the uproar died down, the mood suddenly changed to shock. The judge was adding conditions of his own. The Solidarity statutes must include a clause recognizing the leading role of the Polish United Workers' Party. It seemed an open denial of the union's independence.
drugi i cześć. I koniec nawet. I nas rząd nie lekceważy. Jak do tej pory nic jeszcze nie zostało zrealizowane, jeżeli rząd nie czuł nad sobą jakiejś groźby. Jeżeli my nie przycisnemy władzy do muru, począwszy od dyrektora naczelnego w pierwszych dniach strajku, nic nie zostało załatwione. Jak my się dogadujemy, przepraszam? Pan premier nie ma czasu dla 7 milionów ludzi. No darujcie. Jeżeli dla niego nie ma ważniejszej sprawy jak naród, to kogo on reprezentuje? Dziękuję.
Wydaje mi się, że gdybyśmy w poniedziałek nie zakończyli rozmów, wystarczyłoby chyba jednak rozsądnie zamienić się w komitety strajkowe. To by chyba wystarczyło, nie podejmując aż oczywiście strajku.
Solidarity met the government. The offending clause was withdrawn from the statutes, and the union won its case. But a pattern was emerging. Conflict, then crisis, then talks, as the two sides struck bargains on the edge of disaster. In the end, 80% of the working class had joined Solidarity, some 10 million people. The union leaders tried to avoid any direct challenge to the power of the communist authorities. They wanted what was called a self-limiting revolution.
Any union, when it's beginning, has difficulties controlling some of its members. They want to move too quickly, too fast. Do you think that's a problem Solidarity is now facing?
Well, yes, certainly. This is the problem. And the problem is that because our trade union is so desperately decentralized, I mean, we want to keep it this way. But that obviously has well, that creates some difficulties. Because if we have the trade unionists, which are fairly militant and which are very impatient, which want to solve the problems straight away now, using all possible means, that there's no way we can really put any tap on them unless we use our authority, moral authority.
Self-limitation was an effort to keep labor union formula in spite of some political ambitions. It was, the people avoided discuss situation in political terms. They were pushed from above. This above is now the leaders of Solidarity to avoid open political conflicts.
Asking for the lowering of the budget of the Minister of the Interior, isn't that a political demand?
No, I don't think it is. I think it's an economical demand.
Militancy spread to the private farmers. They wanted fair prices, more state support, storm-proof guarantees of their property rights on the land. But what would the Soviet Union say to a union of private peasants? An independent union for workers was one thing. After all, the working class was supposed to be the inheritors of communism. But the private farmers were seen as a class which would always be utterly opposed to socialism.
Koledzy, bracia i siostry, rodacy, nie bójmy się, my nie robimy nic złego, my nie walczymy przeciw partii i przeciw socjalizmu. My chcemy socjalizmu, ale prawdziwego socjalizmu, takiego, za którym jak krew przelewany. Nie bójcie się, że tam ktoś mówi, że za granicą stoją nasi przyjaciele. Oni już dzisiaj są u nas. Czego my ich się boimy?
This is NBC Nightly News.
Good evening. A sudden and secret summit conference ended in Moscow today. The leaders of the 7 Warsaw Pact countries assembled in the Kremlin to talk about the labor unrest in Poland.
The Soviets called it a gathering of party and state leaders. In fact, it was a Warsaw Pact summit, called without advance notice and aimed at dealing with the continuing crisis in Poland, a situation the Kremlin has found less and less tolerable, and which has prompted fears of Soviet military intervention.
We started to get indications, obviously of an intelligence nature, that the Soviets were beginning to make plans for a military intervention. we started making certain that our allies knew about it, that concerned neutrals would know about it. And I started also to try to convey to the leadership of Solidarity the notion that their, in my judgment, excessively confident expectation that the Soviets would never move could be misguided.
For a moment, both sides in Poland drew together. Party and state leaders, bishops, generals, the leaders of Solidarity, met at Gdansk on December the 16th, 1980. Outside the Lenin shipyard, they dedicated a monument to the dead of 10 years before, when Poles had killed Poles.
I'm a professional concerned with economic matters, particularly from the international point of view. So these subjects are of only passing interest to me. But I consider this movement all along to be a romantic movement. That is, a movement which, if all this were happening on the moon, one could perhaps speak about seriously.
Myślę, że pierwszy raz w historii
I think that for the first time in the history of the modern Polish nation, the people carried through a revolt, which they won, and offered its fruits to the entire nation.
zaoferował jego
And so it was undoubtedly the ennoblement of a class held in contempt by history.
Nobilitacja pogardzanej historycznie klasy.
You know, the revolutions in the West were done by crowds who are used, bourgeois, you know, French Revolution, Russian Revolution in 1970. It was, you know, elite using crowds, manipulating crowds. And here you had real, you know, mass movement situation when it was the strong emotional involvement and real change in way of thinking. And it was more type of a culture revolution with, you know, this jump in perception. And of course, it is maybe more important than political revolution, because these things are more lasting. Simple people are without chance to get power in their hands. After Solidarity, I'm yet more pessimistic about it, because even Solidarity had immediately this hierarchy and new elite and so on. But these changes in mentality are lasting.
Wzywamy was, wszyscy polegli w grudniu. Wzywam Brunona Drywę.
It is said of the Poles that every generation has behind it the memory of an insurrection suppressed. But this is not a history of tragedies. It is a record of fighting forward against all the odds. Candles burn for the dead of 1970 and for the dead of the Warsaw Rising, just as candles still burn for those who fell in the risings of 1830 and 1863, and for the workers who died when Solidarity was suppressed in December 1981. Their light means grief, but also hope.
Wzywamy wszystkich poległych, których nazwiska są nieznane, lecz ich ofiara nie pozostała daremna. Wzywamy was do apelu.